Hello and welcome to the View with Hassan Ali, a new show focusing on current affairs and global politics. 24 years after 9/11, New York City has a Muslim mayor. He's young, charismatic, and what's somewhat rare for the United States, he doesn't think socialism is a dirty word. In this, the inaugural episode of The View, we look at the rise of Zohran Mamdani, the first Muslim and the first South Asian to become the mayor of the Big Apple. And joining me to discuss him is the author and journalist Micah Sifry. Micah's work focuses on the intersection of movements, technology, and democracy. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Nation magazine, and The New Republic, and he also publishes a weekly Substack newsletter called The Connector. Micah, so good to be with you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Before we get started and discuss Zohran Mamdani, it would be helpful if you could give me the recent history of New York City. So let's take, I guess, the COVID pandemic as a starting point and go all the way to the present day. And I'm wondering what the issues are that are facing New Yorkers, because that'll give us, some kind of springboard.
Sure.
Through which to discuss Mamdani's candidacy. So if you could just give me that recent history, run me through, that'd be great.
Right. Well, as someone who was born and bred in New York, what needs to be said is that New York City is a unusual metropolis. It's the largest in all of America, and by far, the next largest city is Chicago, is a fraction of the size. Brooklyn, which is just one of the boroughs of New York City, is bigger than just about every other city in America as well. And in recent years, I mean, it took a very heavy blow with COVID. It was one of the epicenters of the crisis. And in fact, one of the candidates for mayor in this recent election, Andrew Cuomo, was then governor. And we could get into it, but some of the resentment against him, it was how he handled the COVID crisis or mishandled the COVID crisis, in particular with the situation of elderly people in nursing homes, many of whom perhaps didn't need to die because of how he handled things. New York City in recent decades has really become an example of the rising inequality in America. You see Manhattan with all these unbelievable skyscrapers, and then all around it are these very densely populated boroughs where most of the city's more working class and immigrant residents live. It has always been a haven for immigrants. It has always been a haven for creative people coming from everywhere to try and make it. If you can make it in New York, right, you can make it anywhere. But under some of the previous mayors, the tilt of the city even more towards the financial elites, as symbolized by these giant residential skyscrapers that now populate the skyline, that really, I think, got accentuated. And so it's not surprising that the issue of unaffordability, of unbelievably high rents, we even had a candidate a few years ago in a governor's race who the name of his party was "The Rent is Too Damn High," and that in fact has been, I think, a simmering and until recently unaddressed problem that helped fuel Mamdani's rise.
When did you first become aware of Mamdani?
Well, he is not a complete newcomer to the political scene. In 2020, he ran for the state legislature in a piece of the same district where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's a member of Congress, who's already very left-wing and popular in her district member. So he was running as a Democratic Socialist. He has been part of a movement called the Democratic Socialists of America for a number of years. That organization has had a resurgence in membership, especially since Bernie Sanders ran for president first in 2016 and then again in 2020. So he got into the state assembly. He was not a particularly well-known or important member. It's a very big assembly, and it's very tightly controlled by the speaker. He had a few initiatives. The most important one was on experimenting with free buses, which
Uh-huh.
later became one of his signature issues. But when he decided to run for mayor a little bit over a year ago, there were already a number of people in the race, including the incumbent Eric Adams, who was expected to get, to have a path to reelection until corruption issues arose around him. And then the Trump administration bailed him out, which made him even less popular with New York City residents. But when Mamdani started running, he was almost nowhere. I mean, he was maybe at 1% in the polls. Um, and the fact that he's been able to go from there to defeating a former governor who was once probably the most powerful person in New York State, as well as the sitting mayor, really is something.
Hmm. And what would you say his politics represents?
So I would say there are a couple of things going on here at the same time. One of them is absolutely a very organized and committed approach to advancing what he calls democratic socialism, which is this is not about nationalizing the means of production. This is about using the power of the state, uh, mostly through taxes as well as direct expenditures, to improve the lives of working people. So free buses, freezing the rent, and addressing the high cost of childcare. All of these are things that millions of ordinary people in New York City struggle with. As I
Hmm.
said before, it's a very, very expensive city. So, number one, focusing on the affordability problems that ordinary people have. The second thing that I think was really important is a youthful energy. Everything about how he campaigned conveyed change and energy. You can see it in his videos, in the style that they were all filmed. The third thing is um, expressing a universal approach to politics. And this comes out both in how he approached the Israel-Palestine issue, as well as just how he talks in general about the right of everybody to thrive.
Hmm.
That New York City should be a place not just for millionaires and billionaires to enjoy,
Yeah.
but for everybody. And as he campaigned, he was reminding people, those of us who have grown up in New York, that one of the special things about New York City is it's incredibly cosmopolitan. And it's a lot of fun to live in New York City. It can be a lot of fun. Every day, there's so many things going on that you can taste or participate in. And that was something he wanted to ensure that everyone, and not just the rich, could partake of. Um, the other approach to universalism, which I think is where he ran into his greatest challenges, were on issues like the Israel-Palestine issue, where for a very, very long time, um, Palestinians they're just not on the radar of American politics. That's changed, of course, especially since October 7th. The last thing, we can come back to that, but the last thing is what is really important to recognize is that he's Muslim. He's not hiding the fact that he's Muslim. He didn't campaign solely as a Muslim, but he absolutely said to the city's Muslim community, which is roughly 1 million out of 8 million, it's about the same size as the Jewish population of the city. Uh, but for a very, very long time, politicians ignored this constituency.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Mamdani, I think, very, very effectively appealed to Muslim voters, South Asian, another community that he obviously can draw on from his own background. So those are all parts of building a different coalition. We've had liberal Democrats running New York City for a very long time. Occasionally we get centrist Republicans or right-wing Republicans, but Mamdani's path was a little bit different because of all of these factors.
Understood. There's a lot to unpick there. Let's talk about Israel a little bit. I mean, it's
Sure.
sort of strange. It's sort of strange. I mean, I'm sitting here 7,000 miles away, right? And it's
Yeah.
just sort of strange because my perception was that discussions of Israel dominated much of the campaign, both the primary campaign and then also the campaign for mayor itself. Now, what do you put that down to? Because, I mean, look, I mean, if someone was running to be mayor of Islamabad, right, which is where I'm sitting right now,
Sure.
you wouldn't expect people to be talking about Egypt or you know or
Sure.
the United Kingdom or America, you know, like so I'm just intrigued by this.
Sure. So again, we have to recognize there are two aspects to that. One of them is just about constituency politics and the fact that Jewish voters in New York City are a large voting bloc and they turn out in high numbers. Um, by the way, it's a very diverse voting bloc. There are people in the Jewish community who come from the more Orthodox side, who tend to vote Republican, and that's partly out of a very, very strong identification with Israel and believing the Republicans are better for Israel. A second part is social issues, because they lean more conservative. There's a very large liberal and progressive Jewish community in New York City, and we saw that even in the vote for Mamdani, that roughly 1/3 of the Jewish vote went to him, and there were many debates among rabbis, synagogues across the city about how to approach him, because of his very strong, he never denied that he is opposed to Zionism, that he doesn't believe Israel should be a state that privileges Jews over the other citizens of Israel. And that was absolutely seen as threatening, especially to older Jews who have grown up with an identification with Israel that is, I would say, less affected or less willing to see the flaws and the war crimes that the Israeli government has perpetuated with the occupation, with the assault on Gaza, and so on. So it's a complicated thing. But the other reason why it was so prominent, first of all, our media emphasizes conflict. And Israel, because of the very large Jewish population in New York City is probably second to Tel Aviv in terms of, the Jewish population in the world. That we get a lot of intense coverage of Israel. It's almost like a local story in the New York Times. We joke about it that the New York Times really does, I wouldn't say pander, but it recognizes the interests of its readers. And the second thing is that the primary person running against Mamdani was Cuomo, who absolutely chose to emphasize the Israel issue, to try and paint Mamdani as an anti-Semite, as a threat to Jews. And you can see it in the sort of geographic variation of the vote, that there were definitely parts of New York City where Cuomo did better than Mamdani, and some of those are places that are heavily Jewish and probably a little bit more on the conservative to Orthodox end of the spectrum, as opposed to the more liberal progressive.
Hmm.
So, I mean, politics elevates that issue. I've written about this before. We have a hyper intensive focus on Israel for a variety of reasons in America. One of it's the land of the Bible. So a lot of our Christians are attached as well to places that they grow up reading about. The other is that Jews, because of our history of the Holocaust and of past persecution, are hyper vigilant. and pay very close attention to the potential for new threats. Uh,
Yeah.
Arguably, this is a problem of collective trauma that we haven't fully worked through.
Mm,
The good news in the Mamdani case, though, I think, is that, and this is really a sign of his maturity as well as the maturity of a portion of, I think, the Jewish community, is that there was a Jewish-Muslim alliance uh,
mm,
around supporting him, that understands that at a time of greater authoritarian and xenophobic threat coming from Washington, D.C., that minority communities like the Jewish community, like the Muslim community, actually need to stand together in defense of civil rights, human rights, and so on. And that in practice, this actually meant that another candidate for mayor, our city controller, Brad Lander, who is a liberal Zionist, made an alliance with Mamdani. We have an unusual voting system where that kind of thing can be expressed by people ranking their choices, one, two, three. So there were many people who both selected Brad Lander and Mamdani, or vice versa. And we can see again in the vote totals from the primary, which is what set him up for victory, that there really was a Jewish-Muslim alliance in action. So that's, I think, a very interesting and healthy thing for progressive politics in the United States. We've been divided internally since October 7th in a very serious way. That division, I don't think, is going to go away easily, but there's a lot of common interest between the Jewish community, the Muslim community, other communities, immigrant communities, the Black community, Hispanic community. For all of those to be able to come together in support of Mamdani is a very healthy sign. Big question, how will he govern, right? And will he be able to hold all these pieces of his coalition together?
yes, of course. Just before, just before we move on from sort of the Israel angle, I do want to ask you this question.
Sure.
There is a perception, actually, some of the polling backs this up, but you would know better than I do. There's this perception that millennials and perhaps, the generation that's younger than millennials
Mhm.
um, is not quite so wedded to Israel as perhaps the boomers were, or perhaps perhaps their
Yeah,
fathers or their mothers, or that generation,
sure.
and that really what we see when someone like Mamdani runs and wins in a city that is as heavily Jewish as New York is, that perhaps that manifests itself. It shows that there's a new kind of politics that's emerging. How much truth is there in that perception?
I think I'm glad you're mentioning that, because I think it's absolutely true that there is a generational shift underway uh, in the Jewish community for sure. The younger generation, which has grown up with only knowing Benjamin Netanyahu as the leader of Israel. He's been there now for 15 or more years. And so for many people of that generation, the only Israel they can see is one that is very right wing, aimed at continuing the occupation, preventing the establishment of a Palestinian state, and now in Gaza, horrific overkill in response to October 7th. Um, I think that the middle generation, and you're talking to a member of that, right? Knows that Israel also was founded by socialists. I mean, this whole thing that Mamdani's a socialist, that's horrible, and yet, we've had socialist mayors in the United States before, and we will in the future. Um, so I think that there's no question that there's a generational shift underway, but the youth turnout for Mamdani, it's bigger than what's only happening within American Jews. I mean, I think that his ability to get so many young people to come out and vote. Normally, young people do not vote in the same numbers as their parents' generation, and that's
Mm,
partly because they're less rooted. Um, they haven't yet formed an attachment. Maybe haven't bought a home and settled down. Um, but in these, both the primary and in the general, we saw a huge turnout among young people, and that is again a sign of generational shift. I do think that Israel in America is, whatever the big bipartisan consensus of just giving Israel whatever the country wanted, that's gone. Where that's going to settle now is really unclear, and Trump scrambles everybody because you can't tell one day whether he's for setting up a hotel resorts in Gaza or setting up a Palestinian state.
yeah,
I mean, he's so contradictory, um, and I think that's confusing and scrambling the issue for lots and lots of people. But putting that to the side, yes, I think Mamdani, most of those Jewish voters that he got were probably younger Jewish voters for sure.
understood. Um, I want to talk. I mean, a lot of what we've spoken about has been positive. It's been like sort of, like we've been talking about a heartwarming story. I do want to get into. I do want to get into some of the more unedifying aspects of this mayoral contest. I
Hmm.
mean, there's a city that experienced a cataclysm 24 years ago. You know,
Yeah.
9/11, and for it to elect a Muslim mayor 24 years later is in some ways remarkable and is an extremely sort of heartening development. However, it did seem like some of Mamdani's opponents were very quick to play on 9/11, use imagery associated with that attack to discredit him or to create a kind of, I mean, I suppose what they were trying to do was to create some kind of hysterical fear of the man.
Sure.
There was for people in Pakistan or people in in the Muslim world, the idea that Mamdani would impose Sharia law is just about as absurd as it gets. Like because like I mean
Yeah.
that guy would be considered just about as secular
Well, I,
you
if I can
as
interrupt
you.
you for 1 second, there a very funny joke went around on social media yesterday. Someone had posted that Mamdani was planning to require all New York City elementary school children to learn Arabic numerals, and Laura Loomer, who is a very right wing, kind of crazy, and very close to Donald Trump, posted that this can't be true. No, it is true. And then later she deleted her post because she realized that, Arabic numerals are what we all learn. But yes, there is a effort to, but that's a very tired old playbook. The campaigning on fear is a way to get elected. And no question that Andrew Cuomo, who was desperate to get back into the seat of power, having been forced to resign his post as governor after very credible charges of sexual harassment were lodged against him. He was doing everything he could to try and scare New Yorkers into thinking that they needed a tough guy like him. Very Trumpian approach to trying to win the election, whereas Mamdani was campaigning on hope. But
Mm,
I want to say one thing about 9/11 and New Yorkers, because I was living in New York City when that happened, um, lost people I know who were killed in the towers. But what I remember vividly in the weeks after was the entire city came together. First of all, it was the working class that went down to the towers, firemen and policemen who gave their lives. And there was a
mm,
moment of solidarity around this idea that these humble people were now being lifted up as the heroes. But the second thing was the mood in the city was not, oh, let's lash out and declare war. That was coming from Washington, D.C. That was coming from Bush and Cheney and sadly many Democrats. But in New York City, the mood was very contemplative and also not necessarily that we wanted to rush to war. That was
Mm.
imposed. I think that this assumption that, yes, I mean, many Muslims and people who looked Muslim, Sikhs wearing turbans, were attacked in the days after, and there is absolutely an anti-Muslim prejudice in America. But again, New York City is a very cosmopolitan city. You know, if you ride the subway, you are interacting every moment with people who are different from you, and that is part of the joy and complexity of the place. So I'm not so sure that appeals to xenophobia and racism play as well in a city as diverse as New York as they maybe play in other parts of the country.
Especially not 24 years later, right? When
Yeah,
there's been a degree of
right.
introspection about all those wars as well, right?
Yes,
So
but
yeah,
understand this about Mamdani's. I mean, Mamdani, um, in all of his look and feel, as well as his upbringing, he is a classic cosmopolitan, educated New Yorker. He grew up on the Upper West Side. He went to a very privileged private school, and then he went to one of our elite public schools in the city. And, he's completely conversant in all the flavors of how you can be a New Yorker. Yes,
yeah.
he talked about his Muslimness and he talked about his love of South Asian food. But at the same time, if you asked him what his favorite bagel was, he can give 100% credible answer. He's not making it up. I'm sure this kid went to lots of bar mitzvahs when he was 13 because he had
Yeah,
Jewish
yeah,
friends, right? So
yeah,
that's I think another thing that the people who were trying to paint him as an anti-Semite were really struggling because there was nothing in his affect um, that said anything but just another one of these nice bright kids who grow up here, who then can evoke all of the diversity and the democracy of New York City in ways that resonate, that make people feel proud of being New Yorkers.
He's also a representative of, the phenomenon of sort of hybrid identity, right?
Yeah,
Because you talk, I mean, it's just like you were saying, he knows, like he probably has a favorite bagel type, like he probably likes
yeah,
his lock, like
yeah,
as much like anyone else. But then he also turns up on sort of Pakistani television and speaks Urdu with like the host because he knows that's what Pakistani folk in Jackson Heights are more likely to watch, So
right.
I mean, this is actually, hybrid identities. This is a new. I mean, I was astonished to see it, like just switching it on, to see him on like Pakistani
But
prime.
again,
But
understand, Hassan, understand the history of New York City. We
yeah,
have been a melting pot for generations. One of
yeah,
the great mayors of New York City, LaGuardia, the airport's named after him, he built many of the public services that New Yorkers take for granted now. Um, Italian American,
of
getting
course.
into power. I mean, many groups have uh, sort of used New York City as a stepping stone into being embraced into the power system
Hmm.
as immigrants, right? And that is now we're seeing it happen with South Asians and Muslims, and I think it's completely, to many of us, this is just completely normal.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and
yeah.
the larger thing that others are trying to paint onto the city, well, that's a misunderstanding. The media often tries to, create a narrative that sort of fits some pre-existing prejudice about how things work. Well, you know, we have to adjust our assumptions a bit and understand that, Mamdani is I think a very talented politician. He's also steeped in an awareness of the history of socialism in practice, not just in theory, how mayors in many parts of America built up municipal services because they were, in a position to do so. And that's actually, we even have a term for it, sewer socialism, right?
Mm,
When, these mayors who figured out that improving public health was a way to help working people, and you don't have to quote Marx in order to do that, right?
right, right. Um, people, some people are instinctively resistant to change, and institutions, by and large, are resistant to change. Okay,
Yes,
that would be my understanding, just of the way power works and how institutions tend to work, especially old institutions. Having said that, this has not been the last few years for the Democratic Party have not been the greatest in their history. Let me put it to you that way. Okay.
sure.
And it just seems, and perhaps you'll correct me on this, but the bird's eye view, as far as someone like the bird's eye view, as far as I'm concerned, is that it seemed like the Democratic Party was reluctant for a while to own Mamdani as a candidate. Um, that would just be my observation.
Sure.
I don't really understand it. Could you explain it to me?
Sure. And one of the posts on the connector on my Substack, I went into this about how he's entering, opening the doors to some of these closed holes of power in New York. So New York State, you have to understand now, the Democratic Party varies from state to state. So we're just talking about New York State, which has been a Democratic stronghold for a long time. Democrats outnumber Republicans here, though that's just on paper. Republicans do get elected to high office in New York State fairly often. The Democratic Party in New York State has been traditionally dominated by the wealthiest industries, being Wall Street and real estate. And when it comes to electing candidates, whether it's for mayor or governor or for our state legislature, um, not crossing the prerogatives of those powerful sectors has been very important. So we have a fairly liberal democratic approach to things like education, healthcare. We're very generous when it comes to services for poor people relative to other parts of the country. But there is a resistance to, for example, raising taxes even more. We're already a high tax state, raising them even more on the wealthiest, even though, even in the COVID years, the billionaires just got richer and richer, and
Mm,
many of them live here. Um, Now, Mamdani, one of the pathways to his success is that New York City makes it possible for a candidate for mayor to get a lot of city matching funds, public money that comes with every small donation. So donations, I think it was up to $200, are matched 8-1, which suddenly means that you can run for higher office without spending all your time begging for money from millionaires and billionaires. And Mamdani's early rise, even before he started to take off in the polls, was seen in the fact that he was getting so many small donations from ordinary New Yorkers because of this 8-1 match, that people, realized, oh, this guy's got a base. He's, starting to make some headway. And those matching funds, they are not, they're I think the cap is about 8 million, which may not seem like a lot of money, but it's enough. He also figured out how to run a people-driven campaign. He had something like 100,000 volunteers, which is an astonishing number. And they were out knocking on doors, and they basically out-organized the establishment. Andrew Cuomo ran a very lackluster campaign. He assumed the polls showed he was ahead. He didn't have to do anything. He didn't have to just avoid making mistakes, and he'll coast in the primary. And he was very shocked when Mamdani defeated him in the primary. But the establishment moved slowly, right? The Democratic establishment, first, we saw parts of the state legislative leadership endorsing him, and eventually the governor endorsed him. But the national leaders of the Democratic Party, Chuck Schumer, who's a New Yorker, who's a senator, never endorsed Mamdani and was very petulant about not saying who he was supporting. And Hakeem Jeffries, who is also from New York City and in the House of Representatives, he endorsed him late, but he finally did come around. And this is just how power works. We are seeing a change in the makeup of the establishment. We are seeing someone move into power who normally they would not have liked, but they also all read the polls. And I'm sure that that's another factor here, is when you see someone who's popular, it's hard not to, kind of want to align yourself with them. And so our governor, for example, who's up for re-election this coming year, and is somewhat weak in the polls, decided she would endorse Mamdani because she's hoping to get, in return, the glow off of him, the youth vote, and so on and so forth.
Understood. I just have two more questions for you.
Sure.
Thanks for indulging me. Generally, this again is one of my own observations, but and I could be completely wrong again. Generally, candidates of the ilk of Mamdani tend to be better candidates than administrators. They are able to tap into the zeitgeist and sort of spread hope and reach constituencies that don't typically engage in the political process.
Right.
But that hope dissipates over time. We saw this with Barack Obama, I think, notably. Some people don't like it when that's said, but I think it's self. No. Do you think he will actually be able to deliver on the promises he made, some of which are quite radical?
Well, he has three major promises: universal child care, freeze the rent, and fast and free buses. He has the power as mayor because he appoints the members of the Rent Stabilization Board to effectuate that first, the promise around the rent. What that will do to the real estate market remains to be seen. But he should have little trouble at least fulfilling that. On childcare, the governor has already said that she agrees that we should make childcare we should subsidize it. But exactly how that will be done remains to be seen. He wants to do it for children from 0 to the age of 6. The governor maybe will come back with something that maybe covers 1 and 2-year-olds. There are ways of shaving this so that it isn't nearly as expensive or as complicated to implement. And we've seen this before with other social programs. Fast and free buses, yes, that sounds like a hard and complicated thing to do, and he will need the support of the state legislature to do it. But again, they may do it in phases. I think that the issue for the challenges ahead for Mamdani in governing that may both hurt him and help him. The ones that may hurt him are the obvious ones, which is, the city is a big, complicated place. We have a huge bureaucracy. Problems arise all the time. What will he do if, say, we have, a case of police brutality where, he right now is trying very hard to maintain the support of the current police commissioner who has committed to stay on. But, the New York City Police Department is like an army to itself. And politically, it has a lot of power too. They can, in effect, go on strike and just stop enforcing. They've done this in the past. So that's a very complicated relationship to navigate. Um, and there may be others, because people do want to bring him down and to, try and drive wedges in his coalition. I think the biggest threat to Mamdani, which may turn out to be helpful um, in a weird way, is that Donald Trump has said that he wants to stop helping New York City, and they are the this immigration crackdown that he's been with troops going to various Democratic cities around the country. If that comes to New York, it will heighten the polarization that we're already dealing with. But I suspect there the bulk of New York City residents will, if anything, rally in support of their immigrant neighbors, and where Mamdani will be a hero for helping do that. This is every other mayor in every other city around the country who has stood up against Trump has seen their popularity go up because people are disgusted by what ICE is doing. So that may play to his benefit. I think his skills as a communicator and his visibility will help him a lot. I think he's going to get a honeymoon for some period, and then things will probably settle a bit.
Yeah.
But there's every reason right now to expect that he will enjoy a long period of popularity in the city and quite likely get reelected. And so he's going to have an opportunity to put his stamp on New York City, and maybe also spread a style of politics and of political organizing that could be used by lots of Democrats in other parts of the country.
So you preempted my last question, which was going to be, what can the Democratic Party learn
Yes.
from Zohran Mamdani's rise? I could have said the left, but let me say
Well, it's both.
the Democratic, well, ish, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But
Well,
let's say
I
what can.
sure. And this is what I wrote my latest connector post about. When Barack Obama ran for president, I'm glad you mentioned him because he also was really breaking a barrier, right? We had never had a black person elected president before. Um, he built a giant grassroots movement in support of his campaign. He had more than 2 million volunteers working on his behalf by the time of the general election, and then very sadly abandoned, basically mothballed that whole operation and
Yeah.
got into Washington and tried to govern just by, through an inside game of, sort of co-opting various elite power sectors and so on, without using all that grassroots potential. Mamdani comes in also having built a very, very strong, if anything, per capita, his 100,000 volunteers is bigger than what Obama built. And he built his organizing team, did this in a way that is very different than how most Democrats have come to campaign for office. We have a style of campaigning here which is very much about um, you know asking people for their votes in a very transactional, impersonal way. You get text messages begging for money, and you get appeals on the phone from strangers asking for your vote. There's no relationship being built there. There's no community being built there. And that's part of why a lot of people refer to the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party as hollow parties. We don't have intensive grassroots year-round organizing being done by our political parties. Mamdani got elected by doing it in a different way. And while some of his political stances may not sell in suburbia or rural parts of the country, this style of campaigning can be applied by Democrats in other places. It's not something most of them do. Most of them have been trained to think that you just have to raise a lot of money from the usual places and then hire the right consultants and poll test your message, and then put that out in social media and in TV ads, and that's how you get elected. Mamdani got elected by building a grassroots movement that was very relational and built around lots of local community. And that's partly because he comes out of a movement, the DSA movement, Democratic Socialists of America, which also operates that way. But I don't think this has to be ideological. I think this can also just be personal. That this approach, which is also about rebuilding our social infrastructure at a time that many people are alienated, lonely. There's a reason why authoritarian strongmen can attract support. When people are very atomized and disconnected from each other and frustrated, they're also prey to being to appeals that blame some subversive force, whether it's immigrants or Muslims or Jews or whatever. That's Trump's politics. If Democrats, I think, are going to come back into power, they have to provide a real alternative. And some of that is about policies, but a lot of it is also about how you connect with people. That's, I think, the most important lesson from Mamdani, is that a politics of connection and community building not only can propel you to electoral success, but can also involve people in ongoing ways to help you succeed. We are in deep trouble in the United States, as in many other parts of the world, I think, where these connections have broken down and where a lot of people are in frustration with a state that doesn't deliver for them what they want, are lashing out and are open, to blaming the usual, people who we have prejudices against. So that's, I think, the real potential here, is to see if this model can be spread to other places.
Micah, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you
It's
so
really
much
a
for your
pleasure,
insight.
Hassan. Good luck with the
Thank
new
you.
show.
Thank you. Thank you. You're the first ever guest we've had.
All right. Terrific.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, there you have it, folks. Our first ever show on the rise of Zohran Mamdani. Join us again very soon for our next show. Thank you.